Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek Program at the JC Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I am once again at home because once again it is snowing, but that does not matter because we have a program for you today. We have our director, Mark Weathington, who's going to be telling us about boxwoods. He's going to be telling us about the ways that they are being improved in the face of boxwood blight. He's also going to talk about some other boxwood species that you might incorporate instead of the standards that you may know that are susceptible. And he'll also highlight a few replacements that can fill that niche of what boxwoods do in your garden while not being boxwoods, but being other wonderful plants at the same time. So it should be a wonderful program. Those of you watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I can pass things over to Mark.
All right. Love this topic. It was kind of brought up by one of our volunteers, I think, who helps with our midweek programs, both content and the execution. And they're talking about what's going on with boxwoods. You know, boxwood blight was such a huge topic, and it's kind of hard to tell where we are now with it. So I'm going to start off with an overview of boxwoods and Buxaceae, and then I'm going to get into more of the diseases, the care, the all of those types of things that you might want to know about and answer questions. So, usually I like to start with the taxonomy and families and the groups and what makes something part of that family. And the family is the Buxaceae for Buxus. And it's 5 or 6 different genera, depending on your taxonomist. They've recently split some things up, so it may be a little bit more, a little bit less, but the oddball ones are ones that are tropical in nature, so we won't talk really about them. But boxwoods themselves, there's about 100 plus species of boxwoods, and it's a really, really weird distribution of plants. They go from kind of Central America down to northern South America, all through the Caribbean, and then Southern Europe through the Caucasus region and across Asia, and then down into Malaysia, and then also kind of scattered in various parts of Africa, like northwestern Africa, some central areas of Africa, and down into Madagascar. Really weirdly, there's a lot of them in Asia, like a lot of plants that we grow, a lot of Asian plants. But the other center of diversity, where there are probably more boxwoods, maybe than any other single country, is Cuba. Believe it or not, there's maybe 30 or more Cuban species of boxwoods, which is kind of bizarre. And you all know what a boxwood looks like in general, and pretty much no matter the boxwood you're looking at, it looks like what you think of as a boxwood. Some are more upright and tree shaped. It might have longer or narrower leaves, but basically they're evergreen shrubs or trees with mostly entire edge, more or less glossy green foliage. So it's kind of weird that there's so many species, but they're so very similar. So I'm going to go through and show you a few of the odder ones that we do grow at the Arboretum. I was going to look up how many different boxwoods we grow, but I didn't actually get that far. So here we have one of the European boxwoods. This is Buxus balearica, and you may know the region of Europe called Balears. So we got Spain, maybe goes into Portugal, I would imagine, Sardinia, and northwestern Africa. I'm not going to say on all of them that they make an evergreen shrub or tree, but you can pretty much count on that. Buxus bodinieri. This is one that I actually really like. A lot of the boxwoods, I have a hard time distinguishing them one from another. Buxus bodinieri has, if you can see this, the tips of the leaves have a little bit of a what we call a emarginate tip, where it kind of dips in. But the other thing with this particular species, the habit tends to be rather than that just general rounded shape, you tend to get a little bit more of a vase shape and upright rounded, where you can actually, instead of it being just all stems at the bottom splaying out, you get a little bit of a trunk, even if it's just 6 or 8 inches, and then all of it coming from there. It just gives it a slightly different look, but it doesn't always, it means it's not always full all the way to the ground. But that one tends to stay nice and glossy. Very similar species is Buxus harlandii, very similar in foliage. This one, you can kind of see it is in full flower right now. It's the only one of our boxwoods that are really fully in flower right now. But they actually are kind of important pollinator plants. So kind of nice plant, but it actually grows like that Buxus bodinieri with a bit of a trunk at the base. So this is Buxus henryi, and this is one of the largest leafed of the temperate boxwoods. Some of the tropical ones have some larger leaves than this, but big glossy leaves, relatively dense growing. I should say that the bodinieri harlandii and this henryi are all Asian species, Chinese species. And incidentally, these things grow all over the place. I have never once seen a boxwood in the wild. I've looked for them when I was in Cuba. I was hoping to see some, never saw any there. I've never seen them in Asia when I've been there at all. But a big leaf one, Buxus henryi, is not widely seen even in horticultural collections, but it's worth seeking out. Now, another large leafed one, did this one, I had one cutting that had seed on there, but it may have dropped, or had fruit, may have dropped off. This is Buxus sinica. So sinica meaning Sino, like China. Another big leafed variety. This one tends to be more open than Buxus henryi, so a little bit less of a showy plant. But those big leaves are kind of nice. Now, out of all these species that are all so similar, this is a subspecies of Buxus sinica. This is Buxus sinica insularis, and it's got little tiny leaves. Is a much smaller plant. The other one grows up quite large. This just comes from South Korea and Japan. And some of the plants, some of the hybrids of what are available, cultivars, come from Buxus sinica insularis. Some of the more cold hardy ones, in fact. Korea is quite cold, so they do well there. Maybe my favorite species that we've grown is this Buxus wallichiana. Harvey, if you don't have something useful to say. And Buxus wallichiana grows Eastern Africa, Afghanistan to Thailand, but it has these large leaves, again, very dark and glossy and very thick texture. It's just kind of a luscious looking plant to me. Now, talking about those kind of the more oddball species, I should warn everybody, if you're watching this and you're a boxwood expert, and you can tell me that I have misidentified these plants, please do. I have tried to key ours out to make sure they're correct. And let me tell you, it ain't easy. They all seem to have leaves that can be this big or this big. The flowers are really hard to identify. The fruit's very similar. Unless it's wild collected, you have to assume that wherever you got it from is telling you the right thing. So really, most of our boxwoods are labeled as they were received, and they may or may not be Correct. So, okay, a couple of the more common boxwoods. This is, so we're having fun here. My wife is now playing with the dogs, trying to get them out of here, and they are seeing this as a fun game to run around. This is Buxus microphylla, and this is a Japanese species. And you can see micro, small, phylla, leaf. You can kind of see this is tends to be a nice bushy plant with little leaves. A lot of our cultivars are either pure microphylla or they're hybrids with microphylla. It makes a really good garden plant. So some of the real popular small ones like Grace Hendricks Phillips are mostly microphylla. Then we get to the OG, the one everybody, if you've ever seen a boxwood, you've seen this one. This is Buxus sempervirens, common boxwood, or sometimes American boxwood, although it shouldn't. It's not from the U.S. at all. It's this is Europe across to like Iran area and into the Caucasus, North Africa a little bit. But it's kind of got a medium-sized leaf. Tends to be nice and oval, maybe a little bit wider towards the base than the tip. But this is the most common boxwood, and it can get very tall. It can get 20 or 30 feet tall as a tree. Now, what is most often grown, what people know is this plant. This is a cultivar of Buxus sempervirens. This is Buxus sempervirens safruticosa. This is what we know as English boxwood or dwarf English boxwood. This is kind of that real typical bushy semi-dwarf boxwood, the real old-fashioned. If you go to Colonial Williamsburg or Monticello, they're growing either Buxus sempervirens or Buxus sempervirens safruticosa. And it's really a matter of the size of the leaf and the size of the plant. But you actually find safruticosa much less frequently now because there are better cultivars out there. And I'm going to mention just a couple of cultivars of boxwood that I think are exceptional ones. And I'm literally just going to do a couple. I'm only doing one other cultivar that's a green-leafed one. This is one called Vardar Valley, Vardar Valley. And there are growers growing this in North Carolina. It's got very much a almost round leaf to it. It's dwarf. It stays pretty low, maybe 3 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It has almost a blue cast to the really dark green leaves. It's much more evident in the spring, but I find it very beautiful. In our boxwood collection and trials, what we found was this just seems to never get leaf miners, which was our biggest problem of boxwoods in our garden. And the research shows it's actually pretty resistant to boxwood blight as well. So Vardar Valley, most of the dwarf ones have the little tiny leaves like from microphylla or sempervirens safruticosa. And I really like kind of the dwarf plant with these larger deep green leaves. And it just never seems to be discolored. Now, I always love my variegated plants, so I had to put a couple of those on there. This is old plant. This is Buxus sempervirens argentio variegata. So silver variegated. It's got that little silver edge, silvery, creamy white edge to the leaf. There's actually a better white margined plant, creamy white margined one called elegantissima, but that's a little bit newer, but still old, back in the, 20s, 30s, 40s. Now, this older one, you can see, this is coming off the same branch. It has reverted, and you can see that real typical Buxus sempervirens look to it. So if you had this in your garden, you would want to prune the reverted piece out because that pure green will grow faster. You can see it right here. The leaves are bigger. The stems are growing faster. It will take over your plant if you don't keep it pruned out pretty regularly. Another variegated one, another really old one, and I put this in. This is Aurea pendula. Buxus sempervirens, Aurea pendula. That means gold weeping, obviously. It's not very weeping. It's more kind of just open and loose. And the variegation is much more irregular. It's not that border on there. But I put this, I had to include this because I'm told that this cultivar is the cultivar that got JC in trouble at Kew Gardens for taking a couple of cuttings from. They didn't like that he took cuttings from the plant, which, come on, you can root these cuttings. So it seems a little silly, especially since Kew Gardens, they didn't like him stealing their plant, and they had smuggled plants out of all kinds of places around the world, like rubber out of Brazil and things like that. So it seems a little bit of hypocrisy there. But so I had to include that. Now, there are some newer forms of variegated Buxus sempervirens. This is one called Borderline that has this kind of pale yellow, creamy gold edge to the leaf. That's real nice. And this really does not revert much at all. I haven't seen reversions on that. And there are some other ones like Golden Dream that has a really nice gold edge, and one called Angel's Gift, which came to us from a big boxwood grower in North Carolina, Angel's Gift Farm. It was one they found with this pure white edge. It is absolutely striking. We've distributed it a couple times. Unfortunately, when we got into the issues with boxwood blight, that really shut down Angel's Gift nursery as a boxwood nursery. That's all they grew were boxwoods, and that was pretty devastating. So boxwood blight popped up was found sometime in the 1990s in England. And it wasn't really identified then, but it was then found in New Zealand in early 2000, maybe 2001 or 2002. And they identified the fungus that causes boxwood blight. It's a soil-borne fungus, and later identified it in the UK as it's something different, but it realized it was all the same. And I'm not giving you the Latin name for it because I don't know it, and I didn't write it down. But it was then found actually in North Carolina first in the US in 2011. But it was already widespread then because within a month it was found in Connecticut, I believe. Yeah, Connecticut. And as people looked, they were finding it all over the place. And it really blew up the boxwood market in the US. I mean, people were not growing boxwoods. They weren't allowed to ship any. They were having to test everything. And a lot of places, everything they had to be destroyed. Boxwood blight starts off turning your plant, kind of yellow brown, and then will eventually kill the entire plant. Luckily, we never had it at the Raulston Arboretum, except on our original plant of Angel's Gift boxwood. But everything else has been clean, and we haven't had any problems. While I'm talking about issues, boxwood blight is not the only issue with boxwoods. They're a group that has been for a long time, because they've been so important, especially at historic sites. There's been a lot of work done on them. And even back when I was a student, it was one of the few plants that I can remember where the plant pathologists and the entomologists and the horticulturists were all getting together to try and figure out the plants. And what they were finding was A lot of their issues, it was hard to tell. Did it come from the nematodes that were in the soil? Did it come from fungus that was in the soil? Did it, was it the growing conditions? And the answer was yes. It was coming from all of those. If you had poor growing conditions, the plants were more susceptible to root nematodes who would attack the roots, which causes areas for fungus to come in easier, and it just all of that made things worse. But one of the issues that we have at the Arboretum quite a bit in our boxwood collection are leaf miners, boxwood leaf miners, and so they're little pustules that pucker up behind in the bottom of the leaf. These are all dead. But if you look at this, during the growing season, if you get new growth and it has these little bumps and things like that in the bottom of the leaf, you can actually tear the leaf open and see the little leaf miner inside the leaf. And I have seen boxwoods that were so full of leaf miner that kind of on a summer day, if you walk by, it sounded almost like popcorn popping as they were going through and eating the insides of the leaves. And that really, makes the plant look unhealthy. Usually won't kill the plant, but it makes it look, kind of yellowy cast and kind of, just not very good. And, these are evergreen plants, and the dwarf boxwoods don't grow very fast. And so the plant looks ugly for a long time, and they're hard to kill because they're inside the leaf. So you have to, if you spray something, it has to be something, if they're already in there, that the plant takes up, systemically. So it goes through the whole system rather than just spraying on the surface of the leaf. And the ideal is you get them before the eggs are being laid or as they're emerging. But that takes a lot of really close watching of your plant, more so than most people actually do. So how do you prevent all of this? Well, best thing to do is, if you have to grow a boxwood, is to grow ones that are more resistant to all these diseases. For the most part, if you're buying boxwoods at a reputable nursery, they're coming to you boxwood blight free. The industry, probably as much or more as I can remember for any crop, really went out of their way to stop this from spreading as much as possible. It's still in the US, it's still in collections, but it's not as prevalent now as it was, and it isn't being spread around by the nursery industry for the most part now. And then when you get your plant, you want to plant it in a spot that is that's going to be conducive to good growth. That's always the best thing to do to keep your plants healthy, is to put them in a good spot. Contrary to popular belief, the native habitat for a boxwood is not in blazing full sun outside of a colonial style house or as a foundation planting in really tough, compacted, terrible soil. They're, for the most part, woodland plants. Not entirely, but they grow in kind of thin woods where they get some sun, but they get some shade, and they have a nice acidic, humusy soil. So really, that's what they prefer. They can grow just fine in full sun, but actually at the Raulston Arboretum many years ago, before me, during an ice storm, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this now, I'm knocking on wood that this doesn't happen to us. There was a huge oak that was over our boxwood collection, and it completely shattered during the ice storm. And so they planted purposefully a tree called a terrace. Oh gosh, now it just went out of my head. I was going to say Terrastyrex. That's not it.
Terricaria.
Terricaria. Thank you. Thank you, Blake. Terricaria. And that is one of the fastest growing deciduous trees that we can grow. And that was planted there to grow fast and provide some shade for the collection, which is great. People don't think about boxwoods for their woodland gardens, but that's where I have planted a little Angel's Gift boxwood. And that's where, I think they look beautiful. Some of the upright ones, like derunk and fastigiata, that make these little narrow pyramids, beautiful in a woodland garden. So I really encourage people to think about them as specimen plants, not necessarily just hedges and foundation plants. There are ways to get some information on disease tolerance for these different plants. One of probably the best resource is this paper that was done at the USDA, ranking resistance of Buxus cultivars to boxwood blight, and integrated analysis. And you can Google USDA boxwood blight. You can find this. Not going to read it to you, but here you can see how susceptible these things are. So you wanted the lowest susceptibility estimate, even in the negative. So up at the top, you have the ones that are best. So that Buxus sinica variety insularis, that's one of the small leaf ones, very resistant. Buxus microphylla, little missy, again, very resistant. Winter Gem is a great one that's out there. Some of these are hard to find. Buxus harlandii, Richard. Buxus harlandii is one of those kind of face-shaped ones that's beautiful. And Richard is a slightly larger leafed one. There's a lot of confusion, I should say, in these, and it may or may not actually be insularis, but the National Arboretum has the Buxus experts in the U.S., and that's what they're with, so we go with that. One of those gold variegated ones I mentioned, Golden Dream, is right up here near the top. But you can go through and kind of see what's in here. Now, there have been more that have been added over the years. And I would look at this because this was done using science. And I say it because I looked at some other things, and one of the ones that they had said was a good one was one called derunk. And that's way down here at the bottom, or pretty close to the bottom. So, you want to be careful of that. Also, when you look at this, the best one was Buxus sinica variety insularis, but this cultivar, Tall Boy, Miss Jones, these are among the worst of the worst. So, this is if I were going to buy boxwoods for hedging or for some major thing that I really needed good ones, I would look at this one. Now, if you're just buying one or two as accent plants, you don't need to worry about it too much as long as you're getting them from a good nursery. But this is a fantastic resource that's out there. There's also really been, ever since 2011, when this showed up in the U.S., there has been intense breeding work on those. There are all these companies like New Gen Boxwood is a company that is in Virginia, the Saunders Brothers Nursery, that is really Boxwoods were their bread and butter. And they saw that something needed to be done, so they immediately started working on breeding that. And actually, a former NC State graduate was running their breeding program until recently, Holly Scoggins. And they've got what they call next gen boxwood. So if you see that next gen boxwood label on something, those are ones that were bred to be boxwood blight and other disease resistant. And like most of these companies, they have them, they have bigger ones and smaller ones and that type of thing. There's actually two companies, I believe they're different companies. There's Better Buxus and Better Boxwood that are also breeding and introducing more disease-resistant ones. So that kind of gives you a sense, and that's the best thing to do if you're set on boxwoods, is look at these lists of the most disease-tolerant ones, disease-resistant, and look for these new ones that are being introduced, because these ones being touted, better Buxus and next gen, and these are, or new gen, are, they breed them and then they purposefully infect them with boxwood blight to see if they're actually will survive and not be infected. And so only the best of the best are what they're releasing of those. Now, I'm a big believer in diversifying our landscapes. So boxwoods have been pretty ubiquitous. I think it'd be good for us to maybe move away from so many boxwoods. I don't know why people love them so much. The Buxus sempervirens, when they flower or when they're in full sun, they smell like cat pee. The flowers aren't showy. They're evergreen meatballs. They can be very pretty in the landscape spaced in there, but if you want to keep a green meatball, you can grow a Japanese hollies, Ilex crenata, and they don't have showy flowers either, and less disease problems. A great substitute for some of the dwarf ones is the Viburnum obovatum Raulston hardy that we introduced from the Arboretum. That's pretty available here, but in my mind, I'm like, hey, there's some great abelias that flower, that have that size, that are mostly evergreen, that are great for pollinators. Just there's any number of plants that you can use. Our native Ilex vomitoria. There are dwarf forms, upright forms, weeping forms, gold leaf forms, and those, if you have male and female, you'll get berries on there that are good for the birds as well. So, I could give you a list of things, and usually when we talk about substitutes for boxwood, we are talking about little rounded shrubs with small leaves is kind of where people go. But, in terms of a hedging plant, really any kind of densely growing evergreen works great for that, and often is much easier to maintain as a hedge than boxwoods, which can tend to, they kind of suffocate themselves. And the way you go in and prune them is to go in by hand and off little bits and pieces to open it up a little bit without, making big holes. You don't do well with shearing. They'll survive, but what you get is this incredibly thin layer of green, and then everything inside is just open and not doing much. Are there questions?
There are indeed questions. Before we get into the questions, I just want to do a quick shout out to the National Arboretum's Boxwood collection. It's a great collection, and they don't just prune all their boxwoods into little meatballs. They kind of have their own kind of rangy, interesting growth habit, which completely blew my mind the first time I visited there. Like I was plant blind growing up, had no idea plants were even a thing. And then going to see the boxwood collection at the U.S. Arboretum, it's like, oh, these plants can be interesting. They can do interesting things if you just let them be themselves. So that was just a really eye-opening moment for me. So again, shout out to the National Arboretum and their wonderful boxwood collection.
Yeah, and we have had a really significant boxwood collection, and we were part of Boxwood National Trials. And we are probably going to pare down our collection over the next several years. It's crowded. While it's still very interesting, we know that not all of them are great, and we'd like to get rid of some of the ones that aren't so good and bring in newer ones to evaluate as well. Right now we're growing 86 different boxwood. So we've got, like I said, a pretty significant collection of them, but ours are kind of all tight together. But it is, if you go to where our boxwood collection is, and you kind of under the big oaks that are on one side, you can see some Buxus sempervirens that have been allowed to grow, and they're kind of big, wide shrubs that are open and airy and are actually really pretty plants rather than these hard pruned, very round things.
Awesome. So we did have a handful of questions. First off, Marilyn was asking with regards to Buxus henryi specifically. She was asking generally, does the size of the leaf indicate whether or not it might tolerate more shade?
No, I don't think so. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Buxus sempervirens has a small to medium leaf, and it's quite shade tolerant.
Sure.
Again, they don't stay as dense. They open up a little bit more, but that's really more, that gives them more of a natural look. But, the fastigiate ones like Graham Blandy and fastigiata and pyramidalis, those will still keep that shape. It'll just won't be quite as tight, but still
Yeah.
quite beautiful.
Yeah. And like generally speaking, the broader a plant is, the more shade it can tolerate. And
Yeah.
we're of the opinion that horticulture generally is one grand experiment. So there's no reason not to try putting more boxwoods in the shade if that's all you're working with.
Yeah, and they will grow there. The ones that will probably are the toughest are some of the really dwarf little leaf ones. They but I don't always find they're doing that great in sun either. So probably soil matters more than the shade. But I would think any of those large leaf ones would do just fine in the shade. They should. They're almost entirely you know growing in shady conditions naturally.
Sure. And we can actually keep the next question in that same vein because Marilyn also asked about the soil moisture that boxwoods tend to prefer.
Well, they like what we would all want if we were plants: moist, well drained soil, slightly acidic. You don't want them to sit in wet. That will kill them. And many boxwoods have been killed because they're planted as foundation plantings and they're right at the eaves. And when the uh, gutters get gunked up with stuff and water is pouring over and they become really waterlogged there, that will kill them. So you want a soil that does drain.
For sure. Okie dokie. Girish says that they have a Sarcococca orientalis, the Chinese sweet box. They were
Mhm.
wondering how related to boxwoods are those?
Well, I actually have beside me a whole bunch of sarcococcas. Didn't know if I would have time to talk about or not. Um, Uh, Sarcococcas are phenomenal plants. They are part of that boxwood family. Like I said, I have no clue what makes put something in the boxwood family because they are very, very, quite different plants. But the Sarcococcas, or sweet boxes, are fantastic plants. You get creeping ground covers with the Sarcococca hookeryana, variety digna, shrubby plants like Sarcococca orientalis, ruscifolia, saligna, hookeryana, and they tend to be winter flowering, little white flowers, not real showy. On a very recent midweek program, I made the comment that I have never smelled sweet box before. I cut these stems yesterday and drove home with them. And let me tell you, in my car, I definitely smelled sweet box. It
That's
was
fantastic.
powerful. It was nice. And then you get mostly blackberries, but Sarcococca confusa and ruscifolia maybe can get red berries.
Yeah.
But they're great for shade and kind of beautiful. Instead of that real rigid, they have these very almost uh, soft arching branches, a much softer look in the landscape. And then, since I'm talking about them, I'll mention our own native Pachysandra procumbens, the native to the East Coast, is in the boxwood family, as is the very common ground cover from Japan, Pachysandra terminalis. This is a variegated one, but there's just the plain green out there that spreads and makes a nice ground cover. And I don't know why those are part in the boxwood family as well, but by gosh, they are.
No kidding.
And if you ever find Pachysandra procumbens for sale, um, buy some. It's a great, great plant. It's evergreen. It doesn't spread quickly like terminalis, so doesn't make as good a ground cover unless you're looking at 10, 20 years. But it'll pop up with flowers soon from the center, and then new leaves will come up in a really beautiful kind of mottled, and then over winter those leaves kind of lay down on the ground, and you can either leave them, or I usually try and go in and cut them as the new leaves are coming up from the center. But just a beautiful plant.
Awesome. Jared is asking which species of boxwood gets the largest.
Well, with 100 of them, I don't know that I could say for sure with all those. But the largest ones I've ever seen are for sure sempervirens, the straight species. I was just in the garden this past weekend where there's one that's probably, a little over 20 feet. Some of these other ones, like wallichiana, maybe can get larger, and it may just be that they haven't been grown in most collections as long, so I haven't seen them get that big. I'd have to go back in and look, at some descriptions or floras to see if there are ones that will grow larger.
For sure. Melody's asking if you wanted to grow a fun topiary, what would you suggest instead of a boxwood?
Personally, I would probably go with our native Yaupon holly, Hyla Victoria. I think that responds very well to pruning. You can get kind of different sized ones. That would be my go-to for sure. I tend to think where we are, even with some of the more southern conifers, yews are used a lot up north and in Europe, but the cephalataxis, the plum yews that we grow better, I just don't think they make great topiaries for us here. But yeah, that would be my first, second, and third would probably be our Yaupon hollies.
For sure. And I'll just say we had Mike Gibson, topiary artist extraordinaire, at our winter symposium last year. And his answer to that question is, if it's evergreen and it looks like it wants to become a topiary, then you need to listen to your heart and turn it into a topiary. Like, nothing ventured, nothing gained. We're saying that horticulture is an experiment. Same goes for topiary. Like, if it's an evergreen shrub and you see a shape in it that you want to get out of it, go for it. Do it. Like, there's nothing stopping you.
And they do a lot. I should change what I said about conifers. I was thinking about longer needle conifers and yews and things like that. But
Sure.
the scaly ones, like junipers, the Chinese juniper and our native Eastern red cedar are really nice for topiary.
Absolutely. Ruth wants to know, are there any boxwoods that are deer resistant?
I don't know. I don't know if some of the larger leaf ones are more deer resistant or not. I can't answer that.
No worries. Let's see. Gail wants to know if boxwoods that are grown in woodland settings less susceptible to blight and leaf miners, or does it just depend on the species?
I have not seen good research on that. It seems to be anecdotally, in terms of leaf miners, I've seen less issue with leaf miners in woodland settings. That may also be because when I've seen them in woodland settings, they tend to be more individual plants and not big masses of them, which anytime you have a big mass of a plant, it's going to be more susceptible to insects and diseases. And then probably less susceptible to boxwood blight simply because there's roots there that are other roots that are taking up excess water. So you're less likely for the plant to be sitting in water for too long.
Yeah, and you'd be growing them in an environment more close to its natural habitat, which would give it less stress theoretically. And less stressed plants are less susceptible to all pests generally. Okie dokie. Susan says that she's not normally a fan of boxwoods, but Unraveled keeps getting her attention. She wants to know if it'll work in shade to high shade with dappled sunlight, and will it have flowers, and how good are boxwoods for pollinators?
All right, a lot there. So just for other people, unraveled is a really strongly weeping form of boxwood. It's often people associate it with us because we did really promote it quite a bit and helped it gain popularity, but we didn't introduce it. It was discovered, I believe, in Texas by the folks at Yucca. Unlike the old like pendula and Aurea pendula, which just didn't make really tight forms and kind of the tips would bend a little bit, this weeps. And it makes a beautiful plant. You can see it growing in shade when you walk in through our pedestrian entrance at the Arboretum. It's right there to your right under the big live oak. So yeah, it grows just fine in shade. It does flower. You know, the flowers are not showy. They're little greenish things with a bunch of stamens. But the boxwoods, as far as I can tell, all the boxwoods are fantastic for the pollinators. They get worked pretty hard
For
and
sure.
get a lot of fruit, but the fruit doesn't really show up much either. It's a little tiny capsule.
And I'll say this was the first year that I ever noticed boxwood flowers. And as a plant nerd who just thinks discovering those kinds of things is really, really cool, like they're
Mhm.
pretty neat. They're pretty fun. They're like, they're all over the place. They're not fragrant. The days that I saw them, it was cold out, so the pollinators weren't really active on them, but they're there. They flower around this time of year too, it's exciting. It's just exciting when you discover a plant that you've always taken for granted and find this new aspect of it.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's whether or not it is, it provides a lot of pollen or nectar that is beneficial, but it is a plant that is flowering at this time of year. And on in through spring, it'll continue flowering, the different ones. And the pollinators are not active today, but when it warms up again to 50 or 60 degrees, they will be out and looking for flowers.
Indeed, they will, for sure. Okay. And Marilyn happened to chime in a little bit with her expertise on deer resistance with regard to boxwoods. And Marilyn says that she has boxwoods and the deer never touch them, which is really saying something if you have participated in our programs and know about Marilyn's struggles with the deer. If she's able to have boxwoods in her garden, then you can pretty much guarantee they are deer resistant. So that's good news.
Yeah, I'm glad she chimed in with that. Boxwoods are typically known to be something that deer eat, but I've never experienced deer eating boxwoods either. So,
No kidding.
I don't know. But it is a plant that I think of people talking about the deer really eating it.
Sure.
Maybe they're eating the really stressed ones and they're
Honestly,
growing as
yeah,
healthy, maybe not.
maybe for sure. Okie dokie. So Dan wants to know if Paxostema does well in the Carolinas.
Oh, Paxostema. Paxostema cambii is this little low evergreen plant. Looks kind of like boxwood. I love it. I love that plant. I grew it in Atlanta, so it should grow here. I have never had luck growing it since I left Atlanta. And it's got a great name, but a common name, but I can't remember what it is right off my head, top of my head, like rat something or
That's exciting.
now I'm gonna have to
Looking
look
at,
that up.
yeah, I'm not seeing common names. Canby's Mountain Lover is one, or Cliff Green. That doesn't sound as exciting as
No, when I first learned it, it had some like rat stripper. That's it. Rat
that.
stripper.
That is definitely at least in the top five best common names I've ever heard. So
Yeah, I don't exactly know what rat stripper means, but
you don't need to. It's ambiguous, which makes it
that's right.
evocative. So it can mean whatever you want it to, Mark.
Oh, well, I do see a question here about, and I mentioned this, American and English boxwoods. American
Huh.
boxwoods are Buxus sempervirens, the species, and English are Buxus sempervirens safruticosa, the cultivar. That's the wort dwarf one.
Okay. Well, that's a nice little easy distinction. And somebody asked, how about osmanthus fragrans, or do they get too big? And I'll just say, like, they get bigger than boxwoods, but don't plant them in the same place that you would plant boxwoods. Definitely plant osmanthus fragrans.
Yeah, and on beyond that, I would I know there was some questions about topiary, and I would not necessarily topiary osmanthus fragrans because of the large leaf, but Buxus heterophylla, the which has a smaller leaf, or Buxus delavei, but Buxus heterophylla would make great topiary specimen, and has very fragrant flowers in fall.
Okay. And I think you mean osmanthus, not Buxus.
Osmanthus, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, good. No
I
worries.
was looking at, I saw the question about was unraveled on this list of,
Okay.
and so I'm looking at Buxus as I'm speaking.
No worries. Okay. Well, I think that is all of the time that we have for today and all of the questions that have come in. So thank you so much, Mark, for pulling together this presentation ahead of time and giving us something fun to do on a snowy afternoon.
Yeah, well, it's certainly warmer than if we had done it outside, even without the snow.
No kidding. And thank you, Maggie, for stepping in as a ringer for videoing it for us to help us get more clean shots of the plants. That was definitely much appreciated. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the midweek program. We will be back next week. Our director of horticulture will be going over street trees, which should be a very interesting program. We hope we will see you all next time. Y'all take care.